2024. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearings. There are 6 cases on the agenda and 7 board members present, forming a quorum. The first case is RPC 1700404H at 1533 Clarendon Boulevard. Mr. Yanani, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Thank you. So the subject property is the Sonesta Select in Rosslyn, located at 1533 Clarendon Boulevard. It is a select service hotel with 162 keys. The current assessment is $22,687,300, and our estimate of value, while we are going to slightly revise it, comes in closer to $15 million, $15.6 million. On page 3 of 191 is where the county's test sheet is that shows the income approach as well as the operating year 2023 data. And we just want to point out, 3 main issues to the board. And those issues are the other income, the food and beverage income, as well as miscellaneous income, the operating expenses, and the cap rate. So kind of just going down the list, the first thing we want to bring to the board's attention is the county's estimation of the food and beverage and miscellaneous income. As you can see in column D, where the DREA 2024 assessment is, they are using $308,000 for food and beverage income. However, the actual other income for 2023 for food and beverage was $118,000. And more previously in 2022, it was $61,000. I think the reason for this overestimation is due to the fact that the county is looking at the pre-2020 numbers from when this property had a much more active restaurant as well as a bar. Currently, the restaurant is only open for breakfast, and additionally, there is no bar at the property. So as a result, we would request the consideration of the board lowering the food and beverage income in consideration of that. And additionally, the miscellaneous income, the county is currently using $247,000 roughly, while in 2023, it was roughly $100,000 less than that. In our approach, we use the actual 2023 other income, which we find that, many jurisdictions are receptive to on appeal, as it is the best indicator of what the go-forward income will be, and perhaps maybe a, nominal growth factor could be applied. However, no fundamental conditions at the property are changing to solicit such a big increase in that other income. The next issue we would like to bring to the board's attention is the operating expenses. The actual 2023 operating expenses totaled about 64% of EGI, which you can see in column F of the county's reconstructed income statement numbers. And the county is currently using a 61% expense ratio in their analysis. In our requested value, we did use 68%, and this was an error. And it was due to the fact that the income and expense statement filed to the county, the PDF that was rendered by the system was wrong because of the fact that the owner filled out this INE and they were trying to get their net operating income to line up with what it said on their Excel statement. So essentially what it turns out they did, which we figured out after this was filed, is because in the online system, it pulls out real estate tax. They actually double counted real estate tax by adding it back in. So when we initially filed this, we were looking at a lower NOI due to that mistake when filing. And, because of that, difference, the owner did also submit their owner's operating statement, their full Excel statement with all of the details. So after it was filed, Chris did contact us and notify us of that difference. And so as a result, we do think obviously 68% is a bit high as it's not based on the most previous year. And as a result, if we use our figures with the 64% expense ratio, it brings us to a requested value of $18.14 million, which is closer in line with last year's value. And again, that's, the 2 things above the line that we've adjusted there for food and beverage income, and then the expense ratio from 61 to 64%. The next thing that we do is we adjust the county's base cap rate from 7.63% to 8.326%. And this is based on PwC surveys. And while we do understand, the cap rates are relatively fixed and we're not necessarily asking the board to change them, It is worth noting that on page 116 of 91 of the county's BOE materials where the appellant documentation is, we've included some commentary and support on cap rates. But the main thing we want to bring up and maybe open, some type of dialogue about is that the department decreased their hotel cap rates by 25 basis points from 2022 to 2023. However, cap rates, as I think we all know, have been expanding rapidly in 2023 and leading up to the first of the year, the date of valuation. And if you look at the bottom of page 116 of 191, we've summarized the year over year basis point increases for hotel cap rates according to PwC's fourth quarter 2023 survey, which was the most recent as of the date of valuation. According to PwC, full service cap rates are up 133 basis points, limited service 63, luxury 75, and select service 44. Meanwhile, the county has brought their cap rate down 25 basis points. There's also a graph on page 118 of 191, which helps illustrate the rise in cap rates in the market. And while it is a small difference, I do think it's worthy of noting because, again, if we're going to take the county's cap rates as fixed, I think that it's really all the more reason why we should be conservative and, very, very critical of our NOI assumption, because being a measurement of risk, we're kind of looking at this as a holistic approach. And if we're using a lower cap rate, we're kind of implying that the NOI we're assuming is extremely stable and likely to occur. And additionally, we've included some articles that discuss this. I think on, anyone with a CoStar subscription likely is aware of the cap rates situation. I was bombarded with articles this year, but we did do our best job to include a few if the board would like to review. But again, our main request here is for reconsideration of the operating expenses and the other income, which results in a value very close to last year's value if we update those inputs in the county's approach. And again, while the cap rate may not be changed by the board, we do think that it's worth noting that the department did lower them in an environment where cap rates are going up rapidly, and other neighboring jurisdictions like Fairfax and Alexandria held theirs flat for hotels, and DC even increased their cap rates year over year. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Armand. Primarily, we're going to focus upon the summary sheet. In looking at that, you can see that our projections were actually fairly prudent in regards to the success in 2023. Occupancy was up 19% year over year. Average daily rate was up 15% year over year. And subsequently, revenue per available room was up 37% year over year. NOI grew over 31%, whereas our projection is an extremely modest 2.8% increase over what was achieved last year. We talked a little bit about this last year and that they increased almost 1,800%, but over what? But now we can see year over year, again, they are approaching their 2019 standards, if you will, which again was the metric that we use for success, if you will, with standard Smith Travel Research and looking at the metrics that the industry uses. One of the most telling things is, as we talked about, was while we're at a increase year over year, the owners actually projecting a decrease year over year, even after the 31% increase for NOI. We touched on, or I should say the appellants touched on cap rates. We do believe that, again, we're a little bit more aggressive than what the national surveys say. And again, please remember that we're only have available to us the third quarter surveys that come out. So we don't have anything in regards to fourth quarter. But I would point out, and we unfortunately can't show on screen, but we can talk about the resounding success that Arlington's hotel had in 2023. Not only did we beat the area, we were the most successful hotels in the state. We bested Washington, D.C., led the state in occupancy, average daily rate, revenue per available room. The increases year over year for occupancy were 8% up, average daily rate was up 12%, revenue per available room up 21%. The reason we highlight these is to do just that, is to highlight that the Arlington's market is in fact more superior than the general East Coast criteria that's mentioned. You're talking about multiple states, but if we hammer down into where we are, we can also buttress that with some of the articles that have come out lately, talking about Reagan National broke passenger records at almost 26 million passengers in 2023. You then look at some of the tourism records that were set, 4.5 billion spent in 2023 on transportation, lodging, food and beverage. By no means do we suggest that a large chunk of that 4.5 billion was spent on this particular hotel, but I think it's clear that based on passenger records, based on visitor spending records, that the hospitality industry in general is back. While we're not yet at full 2019 metrics, you can actually argue that they're making more with less, in the sense that while occupancy is slightly down from 2019, the average daily rate is up, revenue per available room is up. Again, focus on the fact that our projection in column D is 2.8% growth over 2023's NOI. We find that highly reasonable. Based upon those facts that we've said, we do believe that the county should be confirmed at a value of $22,687,200. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Mendez?
Yeah, for the county, I'm just wondering why they used higher numbers for food and beverage and miscellaneous revenue.
It was surmised quite well by Armand. The idea is that we did believe that there was going to be an approach back to 2019 levels. Unfortunately, we weren't aware that these restaurant became breakfast only. That obviously would have impacted our projection going forward for 2024. But that being said, again, it's roughly 100% increase over what they reported. And again, that's after a 93% increase year over year. So we do believe that it's still a fairly modest projection based on its history.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Yates?
To the appellant, you touched on where you found that error. What was the NOI with the error you found, or the appellant found?
Yes. So column F is the correct NOI without reserves imputed, but that's not really apples to apples if we're applying a 6% reserves on the assessment. So if we impute the 6% reserves, which isn't reported at the property level here, but it is the county's assumption of 6%, that NOI is 1.65 million, which is considerably lower than the county's assumption.
Okay,
If we may make a comment, Mr. Yates?
sure.
I'm not positive, and Armand can correct me, but I believe we asked about these FF&E reserves and that they are not listed because this is actually owned by the company. It's not a franchise, so they actually don't pay those.
Okay, Mr. Matzkin, I think you had your hand up. No? Mr. Lawson? No? No final questions? Oh, Mr. Penaranda. I knew there was another hand.
Yeah, this is just a clarification mainly for Mr. Chicas. The value that you have is 22,687,300, not 200, right?
I showed 22,687,2 on my
200 shows on
worksheet.
the 200 shows on the worksheet, but on the addition, if you add up all the values, it comes up to 300.
Then that would be what we would recommend. Yeah, it's whatever the intranet page would show. If there's a difference, sometimes the Excel may round up or down.
Yeah, the only problem is sometimes when we review the orders, then $100 drives us crazy.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Again,
Okay, Mr. Chicas, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Yes, ma'am.
hey,
So
Mary,
again,
Mary,
I'm sorry,
can I
hold
ask,
on.
I'd
Mr.
like to
Yates.
ask one more question for Mr. Chicas. There's a roughly just $290,000 difference given the restaurant and other revenue from what you're saying and they did last year. and you acknowledging that the restaurant and things are not the same, but you're saying that, well, you think the other revenue's up, so we should just not acknowledge that change in restaurant?
Well, we're learning of the restaurant change this morning, the board members. So in other words, if we'd known that prior to January 1, that may have made an impact, almost assuredly. Again, what we're working off of is when we do these valuations in November, we're basically looking at previous history. The income stream obviously was basically ignored for 2021 and even 2022 in regards to the resurgence, but we did use the 2019 as a metric with which we were applying.
Okay, so there is a $290,000 difference in those two items from what reality seems to be in the restaurant business, on the restaurant now.
You could say that. That's correct.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, I guess our argument would be is that we also only projected room revenue to go up 6.7%. So I think that was on the low side. You can argue that, you know, if you're looking at one adjustment, we'd look to make sure that we're in line with all the.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yes, ma'am. Again, based off of the year that was reported, and this is in regards to the inclusive of taxes in column E, we were projected a 2.9%, 2.8% increase year over year. Again, given that there aren't any FF&Es paid by this owner because it's their own, it's owned by the franchisor, if you will. There should be no expectation to add that back in. Please note that the county does in fact add a 6% FF&E in column D. And even with that, again, a 2.8% year over year increase. Very modest year over year as regards to the 2023 assessment, and much more reasonable than a negative year over year change. That being said, based on the performance of hotels in general in Arlington County, we do believe that this property should be upheld at $22,687,200. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Yanani, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, so I will comment, you know, if a buyer is looking at this property, they're going to set aside in their pro forma an allocation for reserves. In this case, the county is using 6%. If we impute that into the actual statement, the NOI is 1.65 million, which is more than a 2% difference. In addition, this property, while Arlington County fares well, the location is not great. It's equidistant from both metro stops in the Rosslyn area. Cap rates, the DC RERC average on page 117 for national is exactly equal to what it was for the Washington, DC hyperlocal survey. So that's an interesting data point to see that DC actually does reflect the national averages. And additionally, I would like to add that I'm quite certain we did discuss the restaurant at the BOE hearing last year. And I know even last year we did call the property, you know, before the hearing to confirm that the restaurant was closed. So with all those things in mind, we'd really appreciate the board's consideration to adjusting the other income as well as the operating expense ratio, which was 64% before reserves, and the county is currently using 61% before reserves. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. Mr. Yates, or I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start it off. It's kind of interesting because yesterday when I examined this, the question that I had was how'd we go up so much on food and beverage and miscellaneous? So what I did is I just took the income in column G and then applied it to column D, which is the assessment. And after doing all the math, I ended up at 19,357,200. And I'll see if anyone else thinks that was an appropriate thing to do.
So you left the reserve in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you just knock down the food and beverage to like 118 something?
Yeah, what I did is I just took the 5,878,873, and then I subtracted from that the expenses and the expenses in column D, and ended up at the 19.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
I can
All
see
right,
that.
Mr. Matzkin.
First, I had no problem with the cap rate. This sector has done extremely well. I have no problem with the operating expenses. It's right in line with reasonable and recent experience. I too had a food and beverage a hiccup, and I approached it as Barnes did, but much simpler. I said that food and beverage amount, regardless of estimates of revenue and adjustments and, you know, what the bottom line turns out to be, I just wanted to go with what I think is much more provable, and that is that the food and beverage income should be much less. And I just ran a test for $200,000 less than the 308.6 shown, or $175,000 less, and then capped it out, of course, and left everything else alone. I thought the FF&E, by the way, FF&E rationale made sense for the owner. We're not planning this for sale. We're planning it for what's going on now. So I had at $200,000 less, I had a bottom line of of 175,000 less. I had 20,422,200, and I guess I crossed it out. I'm so sorry. I have it right here, just for your consideration.
What was your figure, Ken? 20,422,000.
20,705,600. If reducing it by 175,000, and I did this range because even though the food service is much less, the population of the hotel overnight is much higher.
Yeah.
So I could just keep it flat at the 118 that they experienced. If it were $200,000 less, then it would be 20,442,200.
And no adjustment to the
$300,000 difference.
no adjustment to the miscellaneous revenue. You just took food and beverage.
That's right, because I thought that was exactly in line. And in fact, it probably should go up a little, maybe, but I don't know, because the population, as I said, certainly will be higher this year, as far as we can tell. And so miscellaneous revenue, the snack bar ought to go up as an example. But I had no basis on which to raise it. Sorry, Mark, please go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I looked at both of those.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
If it ought to increase a bit, it ought to increase a bit.
That's
Right, so we have
logical to see some increase.
Okay.
Okay, can you wait till you recognize to speak, because it's confusing. We got three options on the table. Where is everybody? Mr. Penaranda.
Yeah, I did a couple of tests, the same as Mr. Lawson did, reducing the income, but I ended up pretty much going back to what the shows on column E, the actual numbers that they reported. By capping that NOI and deducting the personal property value, I come up with 19,219,600, which is very close to the number he came up with.
Okay, Mr. Mendez.
I did almost the same thing as Mr. Lawson, except I used the FFE from the appellants column G, and I came up with 19,557,000.
All right, so now we have five options on the table. Greg?
I'm not going to throw out another option. I will say I think the cleanest is Jose's, and that's what I would support. I like that it's a moderate increase over last year's assessment, which makes sense logically with the increased rate and occupancy.
Right.
So.
All right, can everybody get behind that, Mr. Matskin?
No, I have a question on that. The key word, Greg, being modest increase. This and most reasonable hotels in Arlington did better than a modest increase over 2022. I'm not saying 50% or 20%.
Yeah,
but
you
it
just
really
gotta.
is modest. You're right on that word.
We want to be kind of smooth if we're going to increase hotels, because there's two things going on. Cap rates are expanding and revenues are increasing, but their costs are also increasing. So we should be kind of on a glide path back, hopefully towards the 2019 assessments, over a few years.
Okay. All right. Mr. Yates, where are you?
I'm good with Jose's number. I mean, they're all pretty close.
Yeah. All right. Mr. Penaranda, if you want to, because we've got so many numbers floating around here, if you want to restate your motion and give us some numbers and explanation.
Sure. Based on there's so much variation in income from both sides, I'm going with the actual numbers submitted by the appellant. My motion is to make a reduction to 19,219,600 based on using the actual numbers from column E and deducting the personal property value.
I'll second.
Okay, that was Mr. Lawson.
Yes.
Okay. Motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it is 6-1 without Mr. Matskin. The assessment is reduced to 19,219,600. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chicas. Do we have Mr. Peralta?
I'm guessing that was a misprint. This is another hotel. So
Oh, we have you again? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
We love having you, Mr. Chicas. Okay, so next case on the agenda is RPC 34027-562. Mr. Yanani, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Thank you. So this property is the Renaissance Arlington Capitol View located at 2800 Potomac Avenue. The proposed assessment is $79,783,600, and our requested assessment is $70,008,000. Our income approach is on page 30 of 108 of the BOE materials, which is where I'm going to be focusing, and I'll explain why shortly. The main issues on this property, similar to the previous one, are the food and beverage income, operating expenses, and cap rate. As we could see in the actual 2023 column, which is the third column in from the right, the actual NOI at the property was about 6.47 million, which was considerably less than the county's assumption. And part of that issue comes down to, again, the food and beverage and expense ratio. So first, we adjust the food and beverage income to the actual 2023 figures. The county is overestimating by roughly 400,000 compared to actuals. And, while there was a big increase in 23 compared to 22, I think that was, definitely expected with the resurgence from COVID. However, 2023 was a pretty active year, and we don't see, necessarily a catalyst for such a big jump in income from 23 to 24. So we would request the board's consideration in using that actual data, as it's really the best indicator of what's happening at the property. Additionally, we do adjust the expense ratio from 69% to 69.5%. I know it's a slight difference, but it does get us, when we're dealing with numbers this large, the 0.5% does make a big difference. We didn't want to be overly, aggressive and use 70, but we did feel the 69 was keeping us a bit too high on the NOI side. Using the 69.5% with our total revenue brings us to an NOI that is still roughly, close to 100,000 more than the previous year. We are projecting an increase, just not to the magnitude of what we saw in 23, because, things are starting to normalize, for lack of a better term. And then additionally, we do adjust the cap rate from 7.1% roughly to about 7.9%. And again, I'm not going to, repeat myself too much, but the surveys do indicate staggering increases in hotel cap rates year over year due to the issues with interest rates. And that's something that, again, while we don't necessarily expect the board to, select a new cap rate here today, we just hope that, knowing that the cap rates are on the aggressive side, that it would translate to a desire to be more conservative on the NOI. So again, those three issues bring us to our requested value of $70,008,000. And I would like to point out one small discrepancy with the county's approach and our approach. So if you look at the test sheet on page 3 of 108, you could see that the DREA income is higher than what we're summarizing on our sheet. And, you know, so just for a little bit of background, this owner simply submits their a PDF of their, Excel sheet, and it's kind of open to interpretation. One could, one could say what expenses should be included or not versus when it's, submitted as a PDF and signed with the actual numbers. And one thing that we believe that the county may have missed here is the taxes were removed from the income statement. However, that was not only property tax. So if you look at page 10, sorry, just a sec. If you look at page 81 of 108, you could see, I'm sorry, 82 of 108, you could see there is taxes and in parentheses non-income taxes of 999,000. However, if you compare that to the actual real estate tax paid on page 11 of 108 on the county's in their pages, it contains the history from the county website. You could see that they only paid about 880,000 in property tax, and the difference there is the personal property tax, which should be considered as an operating expense above the line. And if you, as a quick test, if you multiply, so it puts the county off by roughly 120,000 in NOI on the high side. And as a quick test, if you multiply their value of personal property by the personal property tax rate, it comes out to roughly the same figure. So, no fault on the county's part because, in truth, I think it would be ideal if the owner was more detailed with their submission, but that is something we did pick up, during our review, and we would hope that the board would consider that difference in NOI because looking at the test sheet with the county's estimate of NOI right now, the assessment looks a lot better. But if you compare it to, if you take out that personal property tax, you'll see there is a much bigger difference in NOI being assumed there. So just to quickly recap, the food and beverage is a bit on the high side. We do request a very small adjustment to the operating expense ratio. And again, the goal here is to still project an increase in NOI year over year. However, much more modest with the stabilization and normalization following COVID, as we're not seeing any significant catalysts for, such a big increase in NOI. And then additionally, considering cap rates were brought down this year, again, we feel that's all the more reason why we need to be conservative on the NOI side, because if we're not going to change that cap rate and, reflect the risk and the cost of financing in the market, then it's all the more reason why, we need to make sure that our NOI is in line with what's actually happening and not too speculative. So again, that's how, those three adjustments is how we get to our requested value of $70,008,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikis for the county.
Yes, ma'am. So again, relying primarily on the summary sheet, you can see pretty clearly that we were actually quite close to what was achieved. And given that this is, again, a backwards projection based on what's going forward, you can obviously argue that we're low. Year-over-year increases in occupancy of over 13%, average daily rate increased to over 11%, and subsequently revenue per available room increased over 25%. Everything's up at this property, except for the miscellaneous, but room revenues up over 25%, food and beverage up over 18%, almost 19%, and overall total revenues up 21%. When looking at our projections, again, you can see that ours are extremely modest, and this was well before we received 2023's income statement. Our projections within 2% of what was achieved. We're actually over projected operating expenses, and our NOI projections within 3% of what was achieved. Again, based on the metrics we've already talked about, passenger records being broken year over year, 2022 again broken in 2023. Over $4 billion spent on tourism in the county. We do believe that supports the idea that our projection is low. We'll point out as well that based on last year's value, we're again projecting a very prudent 7.9% increase, less than 8% increase year over year. the appellant's actually requesting a negative 5% decrease, which just doesn't follow after an NOI increase of 230%. Finally, we'd note, as you can see in the comments, the owner purchased this 3 years ago for $94 million. The idea of the principal of anticipation is current worth is future benefits. You can see last year when NOI increased by 230%, the year before 310%. Vast approaching what was set in 2019. Again, we talked a little bit about location on the last one. This is in the heart of National Landing, in between Crystal City Metro, National Airport Metro, adjacent to National Airport. We do believe that our property projection, real property assessment projection should be confirmed at $79,754,000. And the reason, before we get questioned, the reason that the revision is so modest is that we essentially were confirming our original assessment, but we did apply the bid rate that gets chopped off from our original assessment. So you'll see that the bid rate went out to 1,000th place, so from 8.29 to 8.293. So we do recommend the revision at $79,754,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
Excuse me, for the department, I just have one simple question. The appellant brought up almost lost but recently found expense of personal property tax. You didn't mention it in your comments. How should that be treated if there really is a difference between total taxes paid versus real estate taxes paid, the difference being personal property taxes?
Well, we definitely recommend this being brought before a board hearing. Again, this is something that we're learning this morning. Two, we would point out, as Mr. Yanoni did, is that we recommend the owners to fill out the county's INE questionnaire, which has subtotals and line items for these amounts. And then third, I'd obviously argue, we do recognize the personal property adjustment, and that is, of course, that negative 2.189 million that comes off the value.
Okay.
Follow-up, for the appellant, what was the exact amount of that personal property tax not accounted for? Oh, you said 120,000 about. What is it exactly?
Yep, just a sec. It is, 113,893.53. And again, the calculation on that is the taxes in parentheses, non-income taxes of 999,526 minus the actual real estate tax paid per the county website in 2023.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? No? Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Yes, ma'am. It's not so much to attack that last point, but it does sound like it's still assumptive. And the idea is that because it says other non-taxes, and basically Mr. Yanoni is imputing that that must be personal property because they're saying it's not real estate. Without that knowledge of knowing, which would come hand in hand with the INE questionnaire, that was left off the table, if you will. That being said, based on the performance of the property, the income stream that you can see, again, the county was very close, so basically nailing what occurred in 2023. And again, a very modest 2.8% increase on net operating income that saw an increase of over 230%. We do believe that the overall increase from last year of 8% is, again, very modest and much more in line as opposed to the negative 5.28% that the agent is requesting. That being said, we believe $79,754,000 should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Yanani, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Sure, thank you. So yes, we're definitely acknowledging there was increases in daily rates, occupancies, et cetera. We are agreeing to the county's room revenue figures, but it's also worth noting the expenses at the property increased by millions of dollars year over year if you look at column C versus E. So that's something we definitely need to consider, as well as cap rates expanding in the market concurrently. It's put a lot of downward pressure on hotel values. I will also mention regarding the discussion of the personal property tax. You know, I don't believe that we were, you know, sometimes, and we do appreciate it when the department reaches out to discuss and ask questions. This wasn't one I believe that we were contacted about or afforded a chance to discuss, and it was something that I would have definitely liked to, you know, we could have gotten the additional information to the county, always willing to do that. So just want to throw that out there. But I do think that while yes, they didn't sign and certify this is the exact amount, we can definitely certify what they paid in real estate tax on the county website. And so we'd appreciate the consideration of that expense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board members. Where's everybody on this one? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, again, I guess I'll start us off. You know, in the last case, it looked to me like something was amiss and just kind of leaked out because you're in the range of income of around 2 million, and it was a projected increase of 307,000, which was pretty big. In this one, you know, you're in the profit range of about 6 million, and Chris is projecting it to go up about 187,000, which seems to me to be totally reasonable. I don't really see any reason to alter the assessed value on this particular case. And I guess I would also share that, you know, here today, we've been hit with new information that we shouldn't be hit with. This should have been handled prior to this. And it seems like the owner, for whatever reason, just won't fill out the county's form. And the more I've done these cases, the more I realize how well thought out that county form is. And had it been done, we wouldn't even been talking about this morning. With that, I'll share with others.
Okay. Other folks? Greg?
I'll second what Vaughn said. I think Chris is kind of narrowed in on the right value here for this property.
Okay, anybody else? Mr. Matzkin?
Yeah, I hope somebody else can second or third this discussion that the owner neglected to properly document taxes, because I really wanted to reduce the PP&T because I don't know what other taxes they could have paid, but maybe, and that's why we're appealing the fact that misrecordation of the appellant only found very recently. Still, here we are listening to even last second new data that is defensible. I'm not so sure, however, that it's defensible, so I'm going to let it go. Second, since we're being recorded, I wanted to go on the record that I realized I need to correct myself from the last case where I said we're not looking at propose this and that and the other. We're looking at what is right now. Our primary mission is to estimate as best we can fair market value. So on the last case, I was wrong. I thought everybody's notion and direction was correct. So thank you for that.
Okay. Anybody else? No? All right. Mr. Lawson, would you like to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion. I'll go ahead and move that we confirm the county's assessed value of $79,754,000.
Okay, then, and to correct that, that's the county's revised number.
Oh, yes, I apologize. It's the revised number that was submitted.
Okay,
I'll second.
okay. I'm sorry, and a second by Mr. Hoffman. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, that's 6-1 without Mr. Matzkin. The county's reduced number of 79,754,000 even is confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you, board members. Thank you, Armand.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Okay. All right, so do we have Mr. Harmon and Ms. Shuttlesworth?
Yes. Yes, I'm here.
What RPC?
Hold on a second. Okay. The third case on the agenda is RPC 35008005 at 1500 South Fern Street. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board. Annetta, good morning. This is the Claridge House Apartments in Crystal City. It is a 302-unit multifamily property. It is age restricted for seniors, and it is income restricted as Section 8 housing. This building was built in 1979. The issues on appeal are the potential rental income and the cap rate. Now, the county did provide a revised income approach that lowered the rental income and increased operating expenses from the initial assessment. And so for that, we thank the county. Thank you. However, the potential rental income imputed on the revised assessment is still well above what the property reported in 2023. The revised assessment income is still nearly $200,000 higher than what was earned in 2023. Now, as we've discussed previously, the Virginia legislature did enact a statute specific to assessments of low-income housing. This statute states that the assessor shall consider the actual income of the property. The purpose of this statute is to keep the tax burden from being above what the property supports for low-income residents. We included an opinion by the Virginia Attorney General regarding interpreting this statute in the board book. Now, looking at the NOI, we see that the revised assessment is very close to what the property reported in 2023. This is because the uniform vacancy and collection loss rate that legally must be included on the assessment brings the overall NOI in line with the property's 2023 actual. So essentially, the increased rental income is offset by the vacancy and collection loss rate. Now, the income should reflect the actual, and then the uniform vacancy and collection is added to that. The Supreme Court of Virginia has spoken about this exact situation a couple of times, first in Tuckahoe Women's Club versus City of Richmond, and again in Smith v. City of Covington. In those cases, the Supreme Court of Virginia said that a taxpayer whose property is assessed at its true market value has a right to have the assessment reduced to the percentage of that value at which others are taxed so as to meet the uniformity required by the Virginia Constitution as well as by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So essentially, this property is entitled to be assessed at the actual income and expenses as required by the low-income specific statute. And then it's also entitled to the uniform vacancy and collection loss. What the revised assessment does is increases income to offset that uniform vacancy and collection loss, which takes it out of accordance with Virginia law. Next, the assessment imputes a cap rate of just over 6.5% loaded with the tax rate. As we've heard throughout the multifamily cases this year, we know that much newer market rate properties sold for roughly 6.5% cap rates in 2023. If we apply the county's 50 basis point bump for affordable housing units, we see that the cap rate should be above a 7% cap rate, including the tax rate for this property. This is further supported by the difficulty in acquiring a rent-restricted property. The county provides an article in their response that states on page 34 of the appeal that investors interested in affordable housing face high barriers to entry due to onerous government regulations surrounding the properties. Some of the compliance requirements with affordable housing are very burdensome as well. I know that Section 8 housing, such as the subject, there's a lot of compliance requirements that go along with that. Now, this same article that the county provided, it was published in June of 2022. So this is right as the Fed began hiking interest rates. And we'll recall that the Fed ended up ultimately hiking interest rates over 4%. That article states that the cap rate spread between affordable and market rate properties has been as high as 100 basis points in 2017, but had fallen at the height of the multifamily market in early 2022. If this article were more current, if it were, today or even December 31st of last year, I'm sure we'd see that spread increase from the early 2022 level back to the more historic level of 2017, which was again 100 basis point spread. We also see the county has provided a page purporting to support their cap rates. This page in the appeal states a low end of 2023 sale cap rates that's based on what appears to be a $2 million sale or a $4 million sale. It's It's not clear which property they're discussing, but there was only one comparable sale in 2023. And that one sold for above a 6% cap rate. So just by deducing what sales occurred in 2023 and seeing that the only comparable was above 6, so that's the higher end of their range, we know that they relied on a non-comparable property to determine the low end of their cap rates. Now, the high end was the Jasper on Columbia Pike. We did speak about that case earlier this year. And if you'll recall, in that case, the county's revised number was only able to get to a value of $112 million for that property using the county guideline cap rates. That compared to a sale price of $105 million. So that illustrated that the guideline cap rates are too low. The cap rate applied to this property is too low due to the age, the income restrictions, the tenant restrictions. So because of that, we request a nominal increase to the cap rate. We also request that the income be revised down to more closely track the 2023 actuals as required by law. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shuttlesworth for the county, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So this is, as Mr. Harmon stated, an age-restricted property built in 1979. It includes 302 units. The amenities include 24-hour concierge, swimming pool, fitness center, community room, and laundry facilities. There's also over 2,600 square feet of retail space, which is fully occupied. An interior and exterior inspection was conducted this June, and the issue is the cap rate and the potential rent. So with this property, based on the interview with the property manager, all residents hold Section 8 vouchers. The rents are adjusted according to the market rates. So when there is a need to be raised, to raise the rent, the management supplies comparables to the governing body, which reviews and approves the rent markups. But this is at management's discretion to follow the process and to assure that the property does generate fair market rents. So the board probably is aware that these vouchers pay up to 100% of fair market rents. And typically the holder of the Section 8 voucher pays up to 30% of his monthly adjusted gross income. And the Section 8 voucher will cover the remaining balance of the rent. Unfortunately, there have not been recent sales with similar age restrictions in the county. I looked into CoStar, and most recent sales I could find were in 2018, so they're really not reliable source here. Our revised NOI in column F1 is very similar to NOI generated in 2023. Yes, our apartment potential rent income in column F is higher, but this potential rent income was based on the rent information as of January 1, 2024, which were provided to us. Our assessed value per unit is $189,705. And with our proposed revisions, the subjects assessed only $35,100. This is less than 0.25%. They reported vacancy and collections of 2.3%. We applied stabilized 6%. Regarding the cap rates, again, as we stated in our prior cases, we did rely upon third quarter commercial real estate publications, and the cap rates in our guidelines are expressed in ranges, not a single number, and they vary depending on the property type, proximity to the metro, and the effective age. That is it. I am open for questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, for the county, why did they feel it was appropriate to drop the income from their original assessment to the revision? Because it
To
looks
drop
like it's
the income?
yeah, the GPI went from 6 million to 5.9.
So the reported GPI was 5.769 million in 2023.
Mhm.
And in column H, are you asking for the pro forma, column H?
Yeah, in column D1, the county used just above 6 million, and then in the revision, they dropped it by almost looks like about just under $100,000. They used a lower number.
Oh no,
in the
so
revision.
they actually no, the apartment line item. That's line item number 1. You're looking at column H. Actually, they combined apartment and commercial rent, which is about 105,000. So they didn't report it separately. But cumulatively, the GPI is the same. So there's no difference there. It's just the way they itemize the income looks a little bit different. And maybe Mr. Jordan would be able to explain that a little bit better.
No, I think you did. You've answered it because it's combined.
Yeah.
Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, this is for Jordan. Jordan, the statute talks about the affordable housing, but it doesn't impact the commercial. And I don't know what to do with this. I'm sympathetic to your argument, but it's not broken down. And the county breaks it down, and I doubt that your owner actually breaks it down. So let me ask you this, based upon the income that you have in your column H, if you were to apply a blended cap rate that's the county's cap rate, what would that be?
So what we did, and to just further address it, the retail is a 7-Eleven. It's been in there since I think the building opened almost. So it's a fairly nominal retail. The rents are relatively, it's stable. Our cap rate, what we did was we just adjusted the county's blended rate. So we accepted, their mix between the two, and then we just adjusted off of that to account for the owner reporting combined income.
What would the
Actu-
county's blended cap rate have been?
Yes, sir. It was 6.52%.
6.5?
6.52.
6.516, and then we went in at 6.716, so 20 basis points above.
So you went up slightly.
Yes, that's correct.
So it's 6.516. Okay.
Okay, any other questions? And Ms. Shuttlesworth, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yeah, so again, all tenants are holders of Section 8 vouchers, which pay up to 100% of fair market rents. Our proposed revision will result in assessment increase of $35,000, which is literally less than 0.25%. Our assessment per unit will be $189,705. The property is located within close proximity to Pentagon Fashion Center. Per Google Maps, it is about 8-minute walk. And the distance-wise, it's less than half-mile radius. The rents have been increasing for the past 2 years. Since at least 2020, they have been reporting vacancy rates that are below our stabilized vacancy. And again, our proposed NOI is almost identical as the 2023 NOI. There's literally, I believe, $550 difference between those two. And again, the assessment increase will be less than 1/4. So with that being said, I ask the board to confirm the subject revised assessment of $58,489,400. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jordan, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yes, thank you. We've seen market sales in 2023 be below the assessment. So we know that the market's going one way and the assessments are going the other way. So regardless of the increase, it shouldn't be increasing year over year, given what's happening with market rate units, especially what's happening with restrictions on properties such as this one with senior housing and low income as well. Again, just to reiterate, request that the income be adjusted back to reflect the actual 2023, in addition to applying the uniform vacancy and collection loss as required by law. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bob. All right, it's just among the board members. I'll start on this one. I mean, initially, when I looked at this, I thought, with having the 2022 information, I thought the 3.9 was a little aggressive. But I look at the test and I'm fine with the test. I look at, where it is. And as Ms. Shuttlesworth said, I mean, it's $550 difference of what it actually, did for the year. So, I mean, I think that that's more than fair from that standpoint, and the fact that they don't break out the retail, I don't care if it's a 7-Eleven and it's stable, they have it as separate income. So I don't see why they can't put it out there. So to do something where now we're going to blend something because we don't know what portion of it is retail, but I'm just not for doing that. So I'm fine with the county's test. Where's everybody else? Mr. Yates? Turn your microphone on, sir.
Two screens throws it off. I'm looking at the GPI. It's a fixed income property. Fixed income increases. And I'm looking at the progression of the GPI going up. In the prior years also combined that 7-Eleven in there. I'm just looking at where the county is hitting it even adjusted 5.96. It's twice the normal increase over the years. That's where I had a concern. It's a fixed income property. They can't increase it as much as the county's suggesting.
Right. But if you look at, go down a little further on it, I'm just going to be the devil's advocate here. And you look at the NOI. If you look at the NOI, it's all kind of, if you call it trickle down, it's all kind of balanced out. I mean, because again,
Yeah,
I think the original.
I noted that. I agree, but it just.
I mean, so I think we're going to open up a can of worms we don't need to open up. I mean, if you're going to adjust there, then you're going to have to adjust.
Okay, I mean, it's 100,000 or so. It's not that much, but yeah.
Well, it's actually $550, but
yeah, well,
Mr.
I mean,
Lawson.
a higher number.
Yeah, I wish the General Assembly would fix this, because we see a lot of cases where the applicant doesn't distinguish commercial vis-a-vis what's committed affordable housing. And maybe in this instance they could have, but in some cases you can't. I mean, how do you break down the accountant? I mean, and the accountant's looking at the totality of the property, not breaking it down. And I maybe the General Assembly could look at that and could fix it. What I did is I applied the blended rate that the county would be, and ended up at 58,092,300. And I think that, given the fact that the General Assembly has made it clear that with a committed affordable project, you're supposed to look at the actual figures and not assume profit or assume increase in costs or anything of that nature. And the General Assembly did it on purpose, because if you don't properly tax an affordable project, and I mean, for example, the county could say, well, if this wasn't affordable, it'd be worth, 80 million. And so the General Assembly has instructed the local governments, no, you're going to do it based on the actual figures. So I think we should make this adjustment of about 400 grand. And I'll see if anyone else agrees.
Okay, Mr. Penaranda?
No, I pretty much agree with Ms. Shuttlesworth's statements, the last statements. I think they did a pretty good job adjusting the numbers to reflect what's actually, happening there. And their numbers are so close. And I'd rather keep the same, I'd rather keep them separate as far as cap rates. We've done in many other cases, and most of the properties that are being assessed in the county are being assessed that way. So using a blended rate, I'm not in favor of it. So I'm okay with the proposed numbers.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I'm okay with the county. I think it's all right. And Barnes, I would note they've also got a in the test a 4% retail vacancy deduction, which is not an actual.
Right.
Mr. Matskin.
Barnes and the appellant agree that the numbers should be the numbers and as required by law. And I thought they were. I mean, the numbers have to be by definition a little bit of an estimate. And the appellants and the counties, as has been brought up, estimates are very, very much in line. So the only thing I wanted to add was, I've never seen this before. The entire community is being supported by Section 8 housing vouchers, which means this is most of the income, given that it's committed affordable and there can be some vicissitudes and people coming in and out, is guaranteed. And that makes this a very stable property. And of course, there are more people who are seeking vouchers than actually get vouchers. So if one or two people fall out, it'd be very easy to get somebody back in because these owners are very apparently experienced and comfortable with the Section 8 program. So I support the findings of the department.
Okay. Mr. Mendez?
I agree with Ken. Like you said, it's a very stable property. Zooming out, it's a teeny tiny increase from last year. So I would go with the county's revised number.
All right, well, that being said, then I'm going to move to accept the county's revised number of 58,489,400. Do I have a second? Mr. Hoffman? All in favor? Aye.
Right.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. It is reduced to the county's revised number of 58,489,400. Thank you. Okay, the next case on the agenda is RPC 3501302A at 1331 South East Street. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Yes, thank you. So this is the Cortland Pentagon City. It's a 534 unit building built in 2001. The 2024 assessment is an increase of 4.5% over the 2023 assessment. This property is undergoing renovations and also has extensive construction work on the street out front of it as well. Both of these factors have caused the owner to have to offer higher concessions than typical in order to maintain what occupancy they do have. Now, we inspected this property in June and we were able to see firsthand the access issues at the property. There's large road construction. It must be some underlying utilities because they have it blocked off pretty significantly. They've got fencing all around the front of the building that's blocking it off for this road construction. It makes finding the parking garage very difficult. It makes finding the entrance to the building very difficult. We actually had to loop around quite a ways around this fence to get to the entrance. Now, the property also, due to construction, did not have any amenities. Beginning in late 2023, all the amenities went offline. So in addition to the concessions required to compensate for the construction in and around the building, the properties also having to give concessions to make up for the lack of amenities. The property is also competing with new supply that has come online recently in the submarket, Pentagon City, Crystal City, National Landing. Now, over 2,600 new units have delivered in the past 5 years, and an additional 755 units are under construction in the submarket. The amount of new units which offer concessions to lease up has also impacted the concessions this property must offer to remain competitive. This is an annual assessment, and the task at hand is to come up with what would a potential buyer pay for this property as of the date of value, knowing that they would be taking over this property with the renovation project ongoing and dealing with the construction outside of the property. So next, the cap rate. The assessment imputes a base cap rate of only 4.32%. This is the cap rate that is indicative of the very newest luxury apartments, the top of the line. This is not indicative of a property that was built 23 years ago and is dated, and as evidenced by the renovations that are ongoing. In fact, the updates are an attempt to make this property more competitive in the market, but until they're completed, the property simply is not on par with the newest luxury product that is being delivered. We've spoken about properties that are actually comparable to the subject. The Jasper was the big sale from last year. We've been told from the county and from other participants in the market that one sold for a base cap rate of 5.5%. That property was newer. This one's more than 100 basis points below that. It's at 4.32% versus the sale comp at 5.5. So this is true of what we've heard of 2024 sales as well. The county has provided a list of 2024 sales in their response. When we look at the 4 properties when we cut that list of 2024 sales that the county included in their response, when we cut it down to the 4 properties that are actually comparable, that means removing all the properties that sold for less than $4 million. Those are, completely different than this property. We see that 2 of the 4 comparables were reduced on appeal last year in 2023. So knowing that, and we're wanting to look at these sales as a check on the guideline assessments, we go back to the pre-appeal 2023 assessed values. When we do that and compare it to the 2024 sale values, we see that 3 of the 4 sales in 2024 were for lower than the 2024 assessments. They were lower on average by 12%. So we know that the 2024 assessments are not capturing the market accurately. 3/4 of the time, they're 12% above the sale prices. Just as a final note, we've discussed previously the value of multifamily properties is a result of supply and demand. Arlington County has added 21% to the apartment supply since 2020, and this compares against only a 1% growth in population. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shuttlesworth for the county, please.
Yes, so yes, the subject property is a high-rise multifamily building built in 2002. It is located within walking distance to shopping, dining, and Crystal City Metro Station. There's also great walkability to major employers in the area, such as Amazon and Pentagon. The property was inspected in June this year, and at that time it was undergoing extensive renovation, including the residential units and common areas. The property manager stated that the construction should be finalized towards the end of this year. I asked what was the estimated number of units completed as of January 2024. However, this information was not provided to me. I'm just finding out this information right now. But what we did know that as of January 1, 2024, that was approximately halfway through the completion. If we consider the timeline from the start, which was March 2023, and to the projected completion date, which is towards the end of this year, I believe that it was not unreasonable to conclude that approximately 50% of these units were renovated as of January 1, 2024. These units are being rented at significantly higher rates, and the rental rate information which was provided to us included the rates for those units that have not been updated. We still decrease the potential rent. As you can see in our column F, our rents are significantly lower because we did want to acknowledge the lack of the amenities. The amenities were not available to the residents as of January 1, 2024. Our projected potential rent is significantly below the rents that were reported in 2023, and we did recognize high vacancy as well, which are mostly triggered probably by the ongoing renovation inside the building and outside of the building. I'm not sure if the board members looked at the property website and look at the pictures of the renovated units. They're actually very nice. They feature new kitchen cabinets, quartz-eye countertops, modern stainless steel appliances, tile backsplash, floor throughout, and of course, new bathrooms. We did not increase the effective age yet, but we will more likely do so towards the end of the year once the project is complete. Our proposed revised decreased amount is actually interim value, and it will be adjusted in a couple of months, more than likely. As the board can see, despite the 14% vacancy they reported, the potential rent reported in 2023 increased by over 18% when compared to the prior year. And the 2023 NOI increased by almost 11%. At this time, we are proposing the decrease to acknowledge the fact that the amenities were not accessible as of January 1, 2024. They were also not accessible during the inspection this June. This proposed value of $190,637,400 again is just a temporary value and it will be adjusted. And again, regarding the cap rates, we did rely upon third quarter of 2023 publications, and our cap rates are stated in ranges in our guidebook. And again, they depend on the proximity to metro, effective age, and the type of the property. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman.
Can you talk about the sale? Because the number just seems out of whack with the assessment. There's something else included in that sale in 2022?
So I think it's more, Mr. Hoffman, I think it's something with the owner. They made several purchases at the beginning of 2022, and they were all, I don't know how to explain the numbers. So they also purchased 1771 North Pierce and 1788 North Pierce. Those properties in 2022, the first one sold for $334 million. The current assessment on that's $265 million. The second one sold for $266 million. It's currently assessed at $227. So they've made several purchases in early 2022. There were 4 in total, and they paid significant amounts for it. So I'm not really sure how to explain it other than it's unique to this owner.
But this one didn't include.
I can get into it a little bit. Sorry, this is Eileen.
Yeah.
So the owner had a fund, and the fund had certain guidelines, and this particular property met the fund requirements. So it was a matter of spending the fund.
It's almost like a distressed purchase, right? Or the opposite of a distressed sale. Too much money. Eileen, you cut out, but I think I get what you were trying to get at there.
Okay, other questions? No? All right, Ms. Shellsworth, if you take a minute to wrap up.
So yes, again, the property has been undergoing substantial renovations since March 2023. The high vacancy is triggered and mainly by these renovations. We have not adjusted the effective age yet, even though we suspect that 50% of the units as of January 1 were already renovated and generating higher income. For now, we are proposing $356,999 per unit. Again, the property is in prime location within close proximity to metro, major employment and shopping and dining centers. And with this information, I ask the board to confirm our revised value of $190,637,400. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. So just want to touch on cap rates briefly here. So the county mentioned they relied also on the third quarter 2023 surveys. Looking at those, we see PwC. This, of course, is the institutional grade survey. The low end of that rate as a base cap rate, excluding tax rate, is 4.25%. The county has used a base cap rate of 4.32% on this property. So that it's 7 basis points above the absolute best properties in the Mid-Atlantic region. So this property, again, was an early 2000s build. It's currently undergoing renovations. The spread should be more than 7 basis points from the brand new luxury buildings. Now, if you look at Q3 2023 RERC survey, that has a base cap rate range of 4.5 to 8.3 with an average of 6. So this cap rate on this is below the best properties based on that survey. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. Where's everybody on this one? Mr. Hoffman?
I mean, the one thing, when I looked at the rents that were reported for 23, they seem like they're still considerably below that market. I mean, it's an older building, but it's being renovated, and it's a concrete apartment building. It's not like this is run down, walk up type garden style stuff that's out of date. So I think maybe part of the purchase price or part of the, discounting that, even looking at the kind of lower end cap rate of 4.3 on the base, I think that rate kind of makes sense to me when you're embedding rent growth. If you looked at it as, hey, it's already charging top of market rents, for the neighborhood, I would be a little bit concerned about a 4.3 base rate. But if you've got an expectation for, multi-year rent growth, that kind of justifies that lower rate. So I'm okay with where the county's at on this property.
Okay. Mr. Maskin.
I have two quick comments. The first one is, generally, we take very cautiously negative side effects from temporary and foreseeable effects on in this case, a residential community, street being torn up, building going up next door, whatever. And nonetheless, and I was very pleased to see that the department took not the fullest advantage that the appellant would like, but some consideration of the temporary, foreseeable, and optional externalities in the building. And so the $5 million dip. So I think that's a good midpoint between ignoring it because it's temporary and taking full advantage as if it were a full basket case for the rest of the life of the building. Second, I wanted also I'm so glad Greg asked the first question about the sales figure being out of whack with the valuation at the time of sale and continuing on. It's a cautionary tale for us that sales aren't exact. Even when there's multiple bidders, there's lots of reasons that we can't possibly know about what could constitute each and every bidder. We can only estimate based on common sense and experience and history. And and I appreciated, by the way, Jordan's and Eileen's response to what this was all about with this specific purchaser, but it can happen all kinds of ways. And let's not take it a one for one. The sales price is equal to fair market value, and that's the end of it. So that's for us to continue to dwell on as we go through the various cases the rest of the year.
Okay. Mr. Mendes.
Yeah, doing the math, we're at 62.5% of where the sales price was. And even if it was a little bit high, we know next year that it's likely the assessed value is gonna go up. Probably the effective age will go up and the rents. So, the county revised almost $5 million down. So I think they did a good job, and I'd support their revised number.
All right. Anyone else? My initial, the NOI just seemed, high based on what was done in the previous year. But when I did my test, I came up even lower. So, and it ended up lower than last year. So I think that was an overcorrection. So, all right. Would somebody like to make a motion then? Mr. Matskin?
I move that we accept the department's revised total assessment of $190,637,400.
Okay, I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The county's revised number of $190,637,400 has been confirmed. Next case is RPC 250120001 at 925 South Glebe Road. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. So this is the Westmont Apartments. It's at the corner of Glebe Road and Columbia Pike. It's a 250 unit multifamily property that was just started getting their initial certificates of occupancy last year. The property began leasing in July of 2023. For this property, the issues on appeal are the lease up cost and the cap rate. The retail portion is separate and is not being contested. Now, for new construction apartments, owners typically offer generous concessions in order to reach a stabilized occupancy very quickly. This is a trade-off. You sacrifice income in the hopes of achieving stabilized occupancy. Now, the reason for this is so that the owner can refinance out of the construction loan that developers typically use to build new apartments. These construction loans are typically at higher interest rates than traditional loans. However, in order to refinance into a traditional loan, it requires a stabilized occupancy or close to it in order to allow the owner to refinance. So this is what we see with new properties. The first few years of operations have very high concessions that are used to keep occupancy up to facilitate a refinancing of the property. Now that has some knock-on effects as well. Those new tenants who signed with generous concessions, their rental rate, their effective rental rate is much lower than market. So as these initial leases renew, the owner tries to slowly bring them up to market, and they see that there's a lot of turnover because of that. So you can't bring up the rents to market right away. It's a multi-year process. You have to, offer generous concessions the first few years in order to get occupancy. And then it's a process to get those concessions to burn off and get it back up to market rents. This is the case at this property. As of the first of the year, the owner was offering 2 months of free rent to new tenants. This amounts to 16.6% of total potential income that is going to concessions. The assessment considered the concessions by taking a deduction below the line that is equal to half a year of gross potential income. Now, that's on the revised assessment. That's down from the initial assessment that took a full year deduction below the line. What we did for our stabilized potential is we incorporated the 2 months free rent by taking one of the 2 months of free rent above the line and the second month of free rent below the line. So what this does is this accounts for the presence of concessions that are ongoing and that are likely to be present in the future. So the deduction to the income above the line accounts for the fact that at least some concessions will be ongoing for the foreseeable future. That'll be for both renewals and new tenants. Then the deduction below the line acknowledges that 2 months free rent is unlikely to continue on indefinitely. So essentially what we're claiming is that 1 month free rent will continue into the foreseeable future. The 2 months free rent will burn off relatively quickly. That's the reason to take it below the line. Now, this property was there's about 50% of the property is set to expire in 2024. These are tenants, again, who signed based largely on those generous concessions of 2 months offered at the beginning when they signed their lease. These tenants, there is concern among ownership of how can you get them back up to market rents without having a lot of people leave. So that will be an issue going forward, is they're probably going to have to continue to offer concessions on renewals as well. The owner further states that it will be difficult to bring these renewals back up to market because other properties in the submarket are slashing rents and giving concessions to new move-ins as well. So it's a very competitive submarket at this part of Columbia Pike. So in order to achieve stabilized occupancy to facilitate refinancing the property, the owner has had to lease at below market rental rates and at generous concessions amounting to 16.6% of the rent. The owner also anticipates having to compete for renewals with tenants who may be enticed by lower rents at nearby properties. Now, the cap rate, we're not going to belabor the point, but this property is in the middle of its initial lease up as of the first of the year. That, of course, would be a different undertaking than if a owner's buying a stabilized property. You're going to have to come in and get up to speed on the lease up plan, as well as execute the lease up plan. So this property further is just down the street from the Jasper Columbia Pike, which we've again heard at hearings, sold in August of 2023 at a loaded cap rate of around 6.5%. This compares to the loaded cap rate on the current assessment for this property, which is 5.5%. So it's over 100 basis point difference for that sale comp that was right down the road. That sale comp was also stabilized at the time of sale. Now, looking again at the surveys, Q3 2023, PwC's low end is 5.53% loaded with the tax rate. So once we add the metro adjustment, we see the county's cap rate is actually below the PwC survey range. That goes up to 5 5.78%. The current assessment's at 5.5%. So current assessment with the metro adjustment is below what the PwC survey range with the metro adjustment would be. This is also true of the RERC report as well. The low end of the RERC survey is 5.78%, including that metro adjustment. I'm sorry, the PwC low end range is 5.53. So both of those surveys support higher cap rates. The sale down the road supports a higher cap rate, as well as the property being in the process of leasing up supports a higher cap rate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shuttlesworth for the county, please.
Yeah, so this project was built in 2022, and it is a mid-rise mixed-use multifamily property with 250 residential units and over 18,000 of square feet of retail space. The amenities include the library, lounge, fitness room, club room, outdoor kitchen with the picnic area, dog spa, co-working space with the conference room and concierge. An interior and an exterior inspection was conducted June this year, and the issue is the cap rate and potential rent. As of January 1, 2024, the apartment component was 52% occupied. The lease-up process began in July 2023. The retail component was 12% occupied. The appellants provided apartment rent information based on which we determined the monthly rents for the one-bedroom and two-bedroom properties, and these were stated in ranges. So the rent range for one bedroom was between $2,175 and $2,862, and for two bedroom it was between $3,022 and $3,635. In our revision column F1, we used the lower end of these ranges. And for the apartment, we applied half-year below-the-line lease-up adjustment. Again, the property was over 50% occupied as of January 1, 2024. The appellants are projecting potential rent that is significantly below the minimum rents achieved at the property as of January 1, 2024. The appellants are projecting the value per unit to be $260,109. This is, again, brand new construction. For the retail component, we did keep the full year lease-up adjustment since the property was only 12% occupied. And per our 2024 commercial guidelines, our cap rates for mid-apartment with the effective age of 2022 is 5.5%. And again, we relied on our third quarter commercial real estate publications to support our cap rates. And with that being said, I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? No? All right, any final comments? Oh, okay, Mr. Hoffman.
Sorry, I was trying to just double check what I'm reading here, but it looked like there's one retail lease that's open that for business at this point, and I just want to confirm it. And the rate was like 20, it was pretty low, and then the county had a higher rate imputed in there. So is there can you confirm that, Jordan? I don't want to say what the retail rate is, but it looked like you had a number in there. And then the county had $40 a square foot for the retail space. So
I don't believe we appealed the retail portion this year, but it is my understanding there's one tenant as of the date of value. I think it was an urgent care.
Yeah, facility. I mean, if you guys are all on the same page on retail, we don't even need to get into it. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I can check, but that's my understanding. One retail tenant. Let me see what the rent was. I think when I reviewed it, the county's assumption was fair.
Okay. All right, and you said it was 12% occupied on 1/1/24, the building?
Yes.
Okay. All right, that's all I had.
Okay, Ms. Shuttlesworth, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Yeah, so this is, again, newly constructed apartment building, and we are proposing the assessment per unit of $335,770. Our projected apartment rents in column F1 represents the minimum rent fees that were being charged as of January 1, 2024. Half-year lease-up adjustment below the line. And again, the appellants are proposing $260,000, 100 per one unit. They are projecting rents of $6.4 million, which is significantly below the rents achieved as of January 1, 2024. That is according to the information, again, they provided themselves. And on top of that, they applied a full year lease up adjustment below the line. So I asked the board to confirm the subject's assessment, a revised lowered assessment at $91,054,900. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So we just have to keep in mind how this property was operating as of the first of the year and how it's projected to operate the first few years. There's going to be significant concessions at the property. Now, the county's initial assessment deducted a full year of income below the line to account for that. The revised only knocks that down to a half-year deduction below the line. The initial assessment, we didn't contest operating expenses. They were $9,600 per unit, which we looked at a comp that opened the past few years and has now stabilized. That's the Waycroft at 750 North Glebe. That one's operating expenses in 2023 on a stabilized basis at comparable property were $10,800 per unit. So we thought the county's initial operating expenses of $9,600 a unit were accurate. It turns out they revised those down to $8,800 on their review. And then finally, just the cap rate. I want to go with the surveys that support a higher cap rate as well as the market sales. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. Where's everybody on this? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and start us off. What struck me right away when I was looking at this is in the original assessment column D, the below the line was 8,223,000, and then you go to column F1 and that dropped to 3,733,000. And then I looked at what the applicant proposed, and I thought that was a more reasonable figure. So what I did is I just used the applicant's below the line lease up deduction, and I ended up at 87,853,500. And I'll see if anybody agrees with my analysis.
Okay. Mr. Hoffman.
I'd go with that. I think there's that weird year to 2 years where you've literally just finished construction, and honestly, you walk around that building, it still feels like it's under construction right now. So I just cutting them a little slack as far as getting the maximum valuation of this property until they get up, into a stabilized occupancy.
Mr. Metzgen.
I agree with that. But I raised my hand for a different reason, just to address the appellant's contention that it should be a higher cap rate during lease up and all this instability. I think what Barnes and Greg proposed, with which I just agreed, accounts for that. So I dismiss the appellant's contention, but I agree with my colleagues.
Okay, Mr. Penaranda.
I also looked at the same number to make an adjustment, but instead of mixing columns like I normally don't like to do from one to the other, I use the full year deduction from the department's number instead of the half a year that she used, and I come up with 87,321,300. I would just prefer to keep it in line with the same numbers that the county has.
Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, I like Mr. Panaranda's reasoning for not mixing numbers and columns, so I would be more inclined to support his number.
Okay. Mr. Matzkin.
What was the bottom line number that Greg and or Barnes came up with based on how they approached it?
Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I was at 87,853,500. So Jose, you're actually a little below me, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I'd go with Jose personally, just for the consistency of the right columns and everything.
Yeah.
I agree.
I'm okay with that.
All right, Mr. Penaranda?
Yes, I'll make the motion to reduce the assessment to 87,321,300 based on using a full year lease up deduction.
I'll second.
Okay, motion is second by Mr. Hoffman. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. It's reduced to 87,321,300 based on using the full year lease up deduction. Okay, the final case on the agenda is RPC 1401716 at 4401 Fairfax Drive. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. So 4401 Fairfax Drive, this is a 150,000 square foot office building built in 1988. It's located along the western portion of Fairfax Drive in Ballston. This property has been around 40% vacant for each of the past 4 years. This building, if you're familiar with the Poke It Up restaurant there in Ballston, this is in that building. So that's the one we're talking about. The issues on appeal are the leased office rental rate, the operating expenses, and the cap rate. Now, the assessment initially imputed a potential rental income that was right at what we arrived at on our review. It was a slight discrepancy based on different items. So the final number, total potential rental income, came up right at what we got as well. So we didn't dispute that in our written appeal. On the county's revision, they've increased the potential rental income to where it is now $50,000 higher than our projection. Most of this increase is by using a rental rate for in-place office that fails to consider concessions. Now, generally accepted appraisal practice, and by extension, Virginia law, requires concessions be considered. An excerpt regarding how to consider concessions from the Appraisal Institute's textbook, which is the Appraisal of Real Estate, 15th edition, states on page 422 that effective rent may be defined as total base rent or minimum rent stipulated in a lease over the specified lease term minus rent concessions, e.g. free rent, excessive tenant improvements, moving allowances, lease buyouts, cash allowances, and other leasing incentives. The Appraisal Institute further states that effective rent can be calculated as 1, the average annual rent net of concessions, 2, as the same average annual rent but with tenant improvements amortized over the lease term, or 3, as an annual rent that produces the same present value as the actual annual rents net of concessions. This is the methodology the county routinely employs year after year, deducting 10% off the contract rental rate to account for concessions and assess properties using a net effective rental rate. This is appropriate to account for concessions, especially as this property has had to offer concessions of more than 12% to sign the most recent leases. The most recent leases are at a net effective rental rate of only $35.47 per square foot. As you can see on the 2023 column, the property incurred $659,000 in concessions in 2023 alone. These were never captured by the assessment. So this is interesting too. We need to account for these concessions somewhere. If the county's not going to apply their uniform methodology of taking 10% off the top line, then they need to be accounted for somewhere. And we have an opportunity here. The county has created what they're calling a DREA reconstructed column in column E1. And this is kind of cobbled together from all different columns on that test page. But if you look at that, a couple of data points they use the 2023 actual income reported and the 2023 actual expenses, but don't include the 2023 actual concessions. So this is a way to look at concessions. If we add the 2023 actual concessions to the DREA reconstructed column, we get to an NOI that's very close to what the appellants put forth in our pro forma column. So concessions do need to be accounted for somewhere. If we, employ the county's typical methodology of 10% off the top line, you get to our number. If you use the county's reconstructed column, but include 2023 concessions, you get very close to what we've proposed as well. Now, as I said at the beginning, this property has been around 40% vacant over the past 4 years. That means that operating expenses reported at the property are indicative of what the property will incur when it's operating at 60% occupancy. The assessment, of course, grows income beyond what it's actually going to achieve. The assessment imputes income as if the property is going to earn income on being 72% occupied. Since that's the case with income, we should also do the same for expenses, impute them at a 72% occupancy level. We did a study based on stabilized operating offices at 70% or above occupancy in the county. We looked at what did they incur in 2023. This is indicative of a stabilized property. So we applied that. That's on page 25 of the appeal. Those properties averaged $11 per square foot for expenses in 2023. Now for the cap rate, just the standard of proof in Virginia is the preponderance of the evidence. In this case, all of the evidence supports higher cap rates. The county has stated they relied on the Corpax report to develop their cap rates, but the issue with the Corpax report is that it relies on only 2 sales to develop the cap rate range. The low end of the range is one person's opinion of the February 2022 sale of the Microsoft building in Roslyn. The high end of the range is one person's opinion of the October 2022 sale of 1776 Wilson. Knowing how Corpax developed his conclusion, we should look at the 2 sales his report relied on and see which one is the more appropriate comparable to the subject. The low end, the Microsoft building, was 92% occupied at sale, with Microsoft having just signed a massive lease at that building. Corpax's own report states that the buyer of that sale paid a premium for the property because of the presence of Microsoft. Looking at 1776 Wilson, the other sale that the Corpax report relies on, that property was 85% occupied at the sale, and the report doesn't note any adjustments to the sale price. So looking at the 2 sales, and we make the adjustments to Corpax's conclusions that the report states must be made to be valid. That means including the tax rate and making an adjustment for real estate tax reimbursement income. We see that Corpax's range after those adjustments is 7.35%, which is the Microsoft sale, to 9.6%, which is 1776 Wilson. Our proposed cap rate is lower than the appropriate comparable in the Corpax report. We've proposed a loaded cap rate of only 9.3% versus the Corpax sale comp conclusion of 9.6% for what by all extents is a better property. 1776 had better occupancy. It was only 15% vacant versus the subject at 37% vacant. It was also newer, built in 2012 versus 1988. So using the Corpax report as a basis, we see that the county's cap rates are about 175 basis points below where the appropriate comp is. Now, the Corpax report also states that cap rates should be increased for properties that have above market rental rates, such as the subject. The average in-place lease at the subject is $43 per square foot. The most recent 3 leases at the building are $35.50 per square foot. The reason for the Corpax report states that cap rates for properties with above market rents should be increased is because the property can expect NOI to decrease going forward. When those leases renew, they're going to go down to market. So NOI is going to decrease in the future. To offset that, you increase the cap rate. We've also seen 2024 sales support higher cap rates as well. Higher cap rates are also supported by 2023 surveys. Q3 2023 surveys support higher cap rates, as well as the local Delta Market Makers survey. So again, the preponderance of the evidence all supports a higher cap rate for this property. And as such, we request that the cap rate be increased. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm sorry, we're welcoming Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. For this case, I just wanted to point out that there's, compared to our original assessment, the county did test with the new information that we received in 2023. In comparison, you'll see that the original assessment overstated the vacant square feet by 3,081 square feet compared to the 2023 INE, and 2,295 square feet compared to what the agent is proposing in their pro forma. The income that you see in the original assessment versus the test That increase there is mainly due to what we see in the 2023 INE, as you see in the line item 1. With the office income, you see that over the years that income has increased year over year to the following 2023 most current year. So again, our original assessment is using 2022's INE. So of course, when you look at the new information, it does show an increase in income, the actual income that was reported. In addition to that, again, you've seen this in the past cases that the county has reconstructed the INE to show the vacant square footage income. And that income is in line with what the appellant is proposing at 3550 a square feet. That's the same parameters that you see in Dria's test. Everything with the exception of, again, that line item 1 that I noted and the reason why we increased that. I would like to show that the overall rent per square feet with the rent roll that was received was $43 per square feet. So $43.24 per square feet. And the county is using a $40 per square foot rent. In addition to that, that $40 represents about an 8% decrease from what the average is in the rent roll. And in addition to that, the county further reduces that rent by 28% due to our guidelines. So overall, you're seeing about a 36% decrease from what the average is for the rent roll that was received. And that equates to about $27.67 per square foot of a net effective rent, whereas the appellant has stated that they're, for the most recent leases, they're at $34 per square feet. And then, I guess, looking at the historical NOI of the property, you'll see that the prior years are, again, not reporting the income for the vacant square footage. So if you were to grow the prior income as we did in column E1, imputing at a minimum 1.6 million for that vacant office space, and then an additional 179,248 for the vacant retail, then you can see that how our original assessment as well as our test lines up and compares to the history of this property. Line E1 or column E1 shows a good depiction of exactly what the projection would be had you added the income for the vacant square footage. And in our test and in our original assessment, those two NOI figures that we come down to are well supported, given that extra income for the vacant square footage. With respect to expenses, I guess one would argue that this property is stabilized at the 40% vacancy, where you can see year over year that the property is leasing up space, with the most recent vacancy figure of about 36% vacancy. And with that, we do see that the expenses have remained stable over the years. The county originally had accounted for 75 cents more than what they've been reporting. And I think that's a fair assessment of, gradually increasing the rents over time with respect to how this property is increasing in its tenancy as well. Overall, you look at the cap rates, we did see that, again, with our studies, with our resources that we found in our publications, that were above the range that Corpax has suggested as far as our cap rates are concerned. We went again above and beyond and increased the vacancy across the board. We did see that the NOIs were sort of unreachable given what we used for our guidelines. So overall, the original assessment represents a 16% decrease from last year's assessment. And with that, we ask that the board confirm this case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? No? All right, any final comments, Mr. Peralta?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, any final comments in your last minute, Mr. Harmon? Turn your microphone on, sir.
Yes, thank you. So the county states with respect to operating expenses that the property is stabilized at 40% vacant. What have they done with income though? With income, the county grows it by $830,000 above what the property earned in 2023. Now, the county also relies on their reconstructed column. The issue with that is we see that the property incurred $660,000 in concessions in 2023. Those didn't make it over to the reconstructed column. If you consider concessions, which we are instructed we must do, take those 2023 concessions, apply them to the reconstructed column as the county has done with income and expenses, you get to an NOI that is right at what we have proposed. So the county's grown income above and beyond what the property can anticipate this year. They're $830,000 above what the property earned last year, yet they want to say we should use the property as stabilized for operating expenses, but not stabilized for income. They also don't want to consider concessions or increase cap rates. There was a sale comp right down 2 blocks away that sold July of last year for $102 a foot. Current assessment is $243 a foot on this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, it's just among the board. Where's everybody on this? Mr. Hoffman?
I mean, I'll start off. I think the cap rate is too darn high, or low rather. Where it comes down to it, I'm actually okay with the county's test column, but when you get to the bottom line value, it just doesn't compute with anything else in that neighborhood as far as office sales go. There's a number of properties that have sold and are on the market and are going to sell that are all below $200 a square foot, right? Similar vacancies, similar vintage. It's hard to compute it mentally when you look at the sales, 5-10 years ago, but that's kind of the reality that we're living in right now. So I think it hasn't translated to the cap rate because I think the cap rate tables are not particularly accurate on office that the county's using. So, I looked at it as just taking the county's test column F and putting a higher cap rate on it, coming up with a lower value. I'm not quite as low as the appellant. But that's really the only way I can see it. Other than, if we just did direct sales comp approach, we'd be much, much lower.
Right, and can you walk through what numbers you used?
Yeah, I took the test column F, 2.871 NOI and put a 9.1 cap rate on it. And then I did the below the line deductions. And that came out to 29,970,900.
Okay, Bruce. For folks on that, Mr. Penaranda.
I'm actually okay with the current assessment the way it is, because even if you cap the numbers, the actual numbers, the reconstructed numbers that the county has, the cap rate that the appellant is proposing, if you cap that number, it comes to 33,863,000, which is higher than what the county has. So I'm okay with the current assessment.
Okay, Mr. Metzgen.
You had a couple comments, but I'm going to abandon them all except for the one that just was created by Greg's analysis. I last year was convinced that under unusual circumstances, we ought to pay attention to the cap rate and not worry about across the board equity among all fairly similar properties. And I think being stuck at 40% vacancy is such an unusual case. And so I would support raising the cap rate. I think raising it it's about 1.25 is too high, however. And and therefore the resultant evaluation that Greg came up with is too low. This is not a distressed, abandoned, boarded up or semi-boarded up building. This is in a perfectly fine neighborhood, and it shows well, and has on-site management and all kinds of good stuff. So I 9.1 is too high to me. 7.8 or whatever the county came up with is too low. I would, for the lack of a better determination, split the difference. But I'm certainly open to that. But I absolutely would support a higher cap rate. Comments?
Did you do the math on that, Ken? What did you come up with a number for that?
No, I did not. I can do it because it's easy. I mean, whatever the difference is between the two while somebody talks, sure.
Okay. Looks like a cap rate of like 8.475.
Yes. Oh, I'm not muted. Okay, yes. 784. I have it right here. Sorry, Johnny, I had done it. It was right in front of me, but I have so many notes. So on column F, so it makes it 36, 4, 900 minus.
If you increase it to 8.475, it can't be 36.
No, I haven't gotten the below the line yet.
No, I'm talking about just that initial math.
Yeah.
It's like 32 million.
Where's the NOI?
Are you using
column F?
2871652?
Yes, let me do it again. Maybe I typoed. 0.07845. I got 36,604. Okay, so what am I doing wrong? I just did it twice. The exact same number.
You didn't change the cap rate. That's what's in column F, 36,604.
Oh, 6.
I think you're going to land at 32,298, 100.
I got the same number as well.
Yeah, somebody else do it. I'm not good under pressure with math.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it comes out to 32,298,100.
Keep getting this odd number.
And you're using a cap rate of 8.475?
8.475.
And before the deductions, you're at what?
Oh, that was after.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's after.
So what's your final number?
Ken's final number is 32,298,100.
All right, so we got two numbers out there then, 29.9 and 32.2. Or leaving it as is. Where is everybody? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I would be okay with Greg, but if there's not enough votes, I would defer to the higher figure.
Ken?
Yeah, I found where I got the gap in my capitalization rate. It was a very simple thing after doing it 3 times. I would support that middle capitalization rate to account for a chronic high vacancy of therefore the 32.5 million plus.
The 32,298.1.
The
all right, Mr. Yates.
Yes.
I'm good with that because the 40% is what really it makes me question this building. And I agree with this is one that to adjust the cap rate.
And
Right,
I
I think-
understand, of course, there's below the line to adjust for the cap rate, but this is to adjust for the chronic vacancy. But this is
Yes.
chronic trend vacancy.
Yeah, and that's, which is not going to get better. No, most likely.
All right, I think you have enough votes. Mr. Matzkin.
Yeah, so I don't have the number in front of me, the exact number. It's 32 million,
298,100.
what, 98?
298,100.
98. I move that we reduce the valuation to $32,298,100 based on increasing the cap rate over the guideline cap rate. To, when somebody has that number, 8 point,
8.475
thank you.
and using the test column.
Mhm.
Okay,
And
there's a
using-
motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Mendez is a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so it's 4-3, and that's without Barnes, Greg, and Jose for separate reasons.
Yep.
But the assessment is reduced to 32,298,100 based on using the test column, increasing the cap rate to 8.475 because of the chronic 40% vacancy of the building. Thank you. Okay, that completes the agenda. Does anybody have any other business?
Yeah, Ms. Dooley, I wanted to make a clarification going back a little bit on case number 4, Economic Unit 3501302A.
Mhm.
The board's action was to reduce the assessment to the proposed number of 190,637,400. Not a confirmation of the reduction that was made.
I'm
So
sorry.
it is a reduction that we made, not a confirmation of the revised number.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me just pull that one up. 3501302.
Yes.
Confirm revise.
Yeah, I think the motion you made was to confirm the revised number, but instead it should have been a reduction to the revised, to the proposed number.
But isn't that what the county suggested?
That's what they proposed, but they didn't revise, I mean, they didn't lower the assessment yet.
Right, so it's the reduction to the county's revised number.
Right.
Yeah.
Not a
had-
confirmation.
Pardon me?
Originally, we did a confirmation of the revised number. But it wasn't a confirmation, it was a reduction.
I guess that's semantics. It's the reduction to the county's revised number.
Right, right.
It's not a reduction. Flat out
No,
reduction.
it is a reduction. We are reducing to the proposed number.
Right, I understand, but there's a difference between, are we reducing it to what the county is suggesting? Or are we reducing it on our own? And we're reducing this to what the county suggested.
Right, it's just that in the minutes, we have to reflect that we reduced.
I understand
it.
that, but it's a
Yeah.
reduction to the county's revised number.
Correct.
Okay,
Thank you.
we're in agreement. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, we stand adjourned at 11:08. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in person for the board members. And I believe that is it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.